The Galactic Dominion had ruled 17 star systems with the kind of bureaucratic efficiency that would make a tax auditor weep with envy. Their committees had committees, their protocols had sub-protocols, and their paperwork had achieved a level of complexity that required 3 different species of accountants just to file a lunch request. This was not incompetence. This was art. Beautiful, suffocating, gloriously inefficient art, which made it all the more galling when a single human female kept unraveling their carefully orchestrated conflicts with what could only be described as weaponized common sense. Ambassador Vex of the Third Administrative Ring flexed his forearms in frustration as he reviewed the latest reports from the disputed territories. The Cathan Yalan had been locked in a perfectly profitable 3-century war over mining rights to asteroid belt, designated. The Dominion had been selling weapons to both sides, while quietly extracting the most valuable minerals for themselves. It was elegant. It was sustainable. It was exactly how galactic politics should work. Then she showed up, one unremarkable human diplomat who somehow convinced both species that sharing the asteroid belt and splitting profits would be more lucrative than blowing each other into component atoms. She'd accomplished this breakthrough with a presentation that lasted 47 minutes and included what the official report described as an excessive number of charts and several varieties of baked goods. The war ended on a Tuesday, with a potluck dinner. "This is becoming a pattern," announced Director Grex, whose crystalline form pulsed an unhealthy shade of amber. The Helix incident, the trade route negotiations, the great spawning ground accords. Every time this particular human gets involved, our projected profit margins take what the analytics department calls a catastrophic nosedive into actualized. The assembled council members shifted uncomfortably. They'd built careers on carefully managed chaos. Controlled conflicts generated income, created dependencies, and maintained the delicate balance of power that kept the Dominion relevant. Peace, it turned out, was terrible for business. The humans call it diplomacy, offered Undersecretary Nix, his tentacles writhing nervously. Our xenoanthropology department suggests it's some form of primitive problem-solving instinct. Primitive? Vex's laugh sounded like metal scraping against bone. This human has single-handedly cost us 14 billion credits in arms sales and protection fees. She's either the most dangerous individual in known space, or the luckiest fool in 17 galaxies. Possibly both. The tactical display flickered to life, showing a modest human settlement on the rim world of Haven's End. The target appeared as a red dot, currently located in what appeared to be a community center, probably mediating another dispute that should have been left to fester for decades. "The solution is obvious," declared Director Grex. "We eliminate the variable." This pronouncement was met with the kind of thoughtful silence that usually preceded either brilliant insights or spectacular disasters. In galactic politics, these were often the same thing. Assassination requires proper documentation, Vex pointed out, because even homicide needed to follow established procedures. "We'll need a targeted elimination permit, a collateral damage assessment, and environmental impact statement." "Already filed," interrupted Grex, producing a stack of holographic forms that shimmered with official seals. "I've retained the services of the Void Hunters Guild. Their success rate is statistically absolute." The Void Hunters were the galaxy's premier assassination syndicate, a collection of the most lethal individuals from the most violent species in known space. They charged accordingly. Their operatives were legendary for their efficiency, their discretion, and their complete inability to comprehend concepts like mercy or second chances. Perfect for dealing with problematic human. Agent designation Wraith 77 accepted the contract with the kind of professional detachment that comes from having eliminated roughly 400 sentients across 43 different worlds. The target file was refreshingly simple: one human female, no known combat training, armed only with what appeared to be an unlimited supply of optimism and a tendency to resolve conflicts through what the briefing materials termed aggressive friendliness. The mission parameters were equally straightforward: eliminate the target with prejudice, make it look accidental, collect payment, move on to the next job. Standard procedure for what the Guild classified as a Class C civilian removal. Wraith 77 had never failed a mission. He had never questioned a contract. He had certainly never encountered a target who would offer him hot coffee and a ride home. But then again, he'd never tried to kill a human who specialized in making everyone around her just a little bit better. The transport ship's engines hummed as it dropped out of hyperspace above Haven's End. Below, a small blue-green world spun peacefully in the void, completely unaware that the galaxy's most expensive problem solver was about to become someone's new favorite neighbor. Haven's End turned out to be one of those aggressively pleasant frontier worlds where the biggest controversy involved whether the community garden should expand into the East Meadow or the West Field. Wraith 77 materialized from his stealth transport, expecting to find a typical human settlement, chaotic, poorly defended, and blissfully unaware of galactic realities. Instead, he found what appeared to be a small-scale miracle of intercultural cooperation. The atmospheric processors had been modified with Keth engineering principles, Yalan crystal technology, and what his scanner identified as approximately 74 unauthorized improvements of unknown origin. The result was air so clean it made his filtration systems think they were malfunctioning. The local humans had apparently decided that standard atmospheric composition wasn't quite good enough, and had taken it upon themselves to make breathing a more aesthetically pleasing experience. His first clue that this mission might deviate from standard parameters came when his military-grade cloaking device started making sounds like a dying walrus. The modified atmosphere was playing havoc with his equipment's optical processors, rendering his 40,000 credit invisibility suit about as subtle as a neon sign advertising, "Deadly Assassin." "Here. Technical difficulties?" asked a voice behind him. Wraith 77 spun around, weapon raised, only to find an elderly human male tending to what appeared to be a hybrid crop that shouldn't exist according to several laws of botany. The farmer was looking at him with the kind of mild interest usually reserved for mildly unusual weather patterns. "Your stealth tech is probably having issues with our atmospheric blend," the human continued conversationally, as if chatting with invisible killers was a regular Tuesday occurrence. "The Yalan crystals interact weird with most standard cloaking matrices. You might want to recalibrate for a higher photon saturation index." The assassin stared. In 3 decades of professional murder, no one had ever offered him technical support. "The person you're looking for is probably over at the community center," the farmer added helpfully, pointing toward a modest building that buzzed with activity. "She's mediating the great cucumber incident of this morning. Should be wrapped up by lunch." By the time Wraith 77 processed this information, the farmer had returned to his impossible vegetables, humming what sounded suspiciously like an ancient Keth work song. The community center presented what should have been the perfect opportunity: multiple exit points, civilians as cover, and a target who was apparently focused on resolving vegetable-related disputes. The assassin positioned himself behind a decorative planter that provided clear sightlines to the main entrance. His target emerged exactly on schedule, engaged in animated conversation with what appeared to be representatives from 4 different species, all of whom were laughing about something involving competitive gardening and dietary restriction. She was shorter than her file photos suggested, with the kind of face that looked like it had never met a problem it couldn't solve with sufficient application of patience and possibly snack. Wraith 77 raised his plasma rifle, adjusted for windage and the planet's slightly higher gravity, and prepared to end a career in weaponized kindness, which was when his target stopped mid-sentence to help an elderly Hex citizen who had dropped his walking stick. The shot that should have been perfect instead vaporized a decorative fountain, because apparently the universe had developed a sense of humor about professional assassination. His target looked around with mild curiosity at the sudden appearance of steam and melted ceramics, shrugged, and continued her conversation about sustainable agriculture technique. The second attempt involved a carefully placed explosive device in the path she took every morning to the agricultural research station. The device was designed to look like equipment failure, tragic but unsuspicious. Unfortunately, his target's morning routine included stopping to chat with a Keth engineer about improvements to the irrigation system. Their conversation ran long enough that a small human child wandered into the blast radius to retrieve a lost toy. Without hesitation, she scooped up the child and carried him to safety, which put her exactly 3 meters outside the device's effective range when it detonated. The explosion destroyed a patch of prize-winning tomatoes and apparently made her day, because she spent the next hour helping the engineer design better safety protocols for agricultural equipment. By evening, Wraith 77 was forced to confront an unprecedented possibility. His target wasn't avoiding death through luck, training, or enhanced reflexes. She was avoiding it through the simple expedient of being exactly the kind of person the universe seemed determined to protect. Professional pride was a funny thing. It kept you warm during those long nights spent calculating trajectory vectors and poison dosages. It paid for decent equipment and better accommodation. It was also, Wraith 77 was discovering, surprisingly fragile when confronted with someone who treated attempted murder as a minor inconvenience somewhere between inclement weather and mildly burnt toast. By day 4, he'd abandoned subtlety entirely and taken to following his target around like the galaxy's most overpaid stalker. This decision led to what his mission logs would later record as the most professionally humiliating 72 hours in a career otherwise notable for its efficiency and discretion. The target he really needed to start thinking of her as something other than the target, since she'd personally introduced herself to half the settlement by now, maintained a schedule that seemed designed by someone who had never heard of the concept of personal security. Morning constitutional along completely unmonitored pathways, afternoon visits to various community projects without escorts or communication devices, evening walks through areas where any competent assassin could set up a dozen different ambush scenarios. It should have been like shooting fish in a barrel, if the fish had developed an inexplicable ability to make the barrel feel guilty about the whole enterprise. Wednesday morning found her mediating a dispute between 3 different alien refugee families over water usage rights in the communal agricultural plots. The Hex family needed mineral-rich water for their semi-crystalline offspring. The Dorth required water heated to precisely 43 degrees for their digestive processes. The Nellen family insisted that any water touching their food sources must be blessed according to traditional rituals involving 17 different types of incense and at least 3 days of prior blessing. According to every diplomatic training manual Wraith 77 had ever read during his pre-assassination intelligence career, this was the kind of problem that escalated into generational feuds, required expensive mediation services, or ended with someone getting stabbed over seasonal irrigation schedules. She solved it in 20 minutes with a thermos of hot chocolate and a napkin sketch. So the main issue isn't the water itself, it's the timing and treatment requirements, she said, offering the thermos around while drawing what appeared to be a plumbing diagram. What if we set up a system where the blessing happens first, then heating, then mineral enrichment, like an assembly line but for water? The Nellen patriarch looked skeptical. The blessings require flowing water. Standing water cannot hold proper sanctification. Right, but what if the blessing happens while the water is flowing through the heating system, and then the minerals get added during the final phase when it flows into the irrigation channels? The Hex matriarch's crystalline features brightened. A continuous process, the water never stops moving, so each family's requirements are met in sequence.
Exactly. And we can time it so everyone gets their water when they need it. The Dorth evening feeding, the Hex morning growth period, the Nellen afternoon agricultural window. Within the hour they were sharing breakfast and comparing notes on child-rearing techniques across species lines. The Hex offered to help with metalwork for the new system. The Dorth volunteered their expertise in thermal regulation. The Nellen insisted on blessing the entire project for good fortune. Wraith 77 watched this display of practical cooperation from behind a carefully selected observation post, and felt something that might have been professionally inappropriate doubt creeping into his mental processes. His target wasn't just solving problems. She was creating solutions that left everyone better off than when they started. This wasn't diplomacy as he understood it, with winners and losers and carefully negotiated compromises. This was something closer to alchemy, transforming conflicts into collaborations with nothing more than attention and optimism. The afternoon brought the weekly refugee integration meeting, where his target somehow convinced a room full of displaced aliens that their diverse skill sets could be combined into a thriving multi-species community rather than competing factions struggling over limited resources. She did this primarily by asking questions like, what do you need, and how can we make that work,
and then actually listening to the answers with the kind of focus usually reserved for military intelligence briefing. A fourth engineer mentioned problems with power distribution for their district's life support systems. Within minutes, she'd connected him with a Yalan crystal specialist and a human electrical technician, who were apparently delighted to collaborate on improving the settlement's entire power grid. The conversation devolved into excited technical discussions about efficiency improvements in renewable energy sources. An elderly Keth scholar worried about preserving cultural traditions in an integrated community received immediate offers from 3 different families to help establish a cultural center and library. The human children, it turned out, were fascinated by Keth historical songs and had been pestering their parents for language lessons. 2 Hex siblings concerned about their adolescent spawning requirements found themselves surrounded by volunteers eager to help construct appropriate environmental chambers, including one human teenager who'd apparently written a research paper on Hex reproductive biology and was thrilled to apply theoretical knowledge to practical engineering problems. By evening, what had started as a routine administrative meeting had transformed into an impromptu community festival, complete with shared meals, cultural presentations and architectural planning sessions that spilled out into the courtyard. Wraith 77 observed this display of species cooperation with the growing realization that he was watching something unprecedented in his considerable experience with galactic politics. This wasn't the careful balance of mutual benefit that characterized most interspecies relations. This was genuine community, built on the revolutionary principle that everyone's problems were everyone's problems, and everyone's solutions belonged to everyone. His target moved through it all with the kind of unconscious competence that made it look effortless. She remembered names, dietary restrictions, cultural sensitivities and technical specifications with equal ease. She asked follow-up questions about family memes, project progress, and personal concerns with the attention to detail that intelligence operatives usually reserved for high-value targets. More disturbing still, she seemed genuinely happy. Not the performative cheerfulness of professional diplomats or the calculated friendliness of political operatives, but actual joy in seeing people solve problems together. Thursday brought the ultimate test of Wraith 77's professional capabilities, a carefully planned ambush during what should have been a routine evening walk. Perfect lighting conditions, optimal sight lines, no witnesses and a target who was finally mercifully alone. He'd positioned himself behind the settlement's weather monitoring station, with clear shots at 3 different points along her usual route. Military-grade targeting system engaged, environmental variables calculated, backup escape routes confirmed. This was going to be a textbook elimination, the kind of clean operation that would restore his professional reputation. His target appeared on schedule, walking slowly and apparently lost in thought. Perfect conditions, ideal range, no complication. The shot was lined up, finger on the trigger, when she suddenly stopped and knelt beside something small and dark on the path ahead. Through his scope, Wraith 77 watched her carefully lift what appeared to be an injured native creature, something that looked like a cross between a rabbit and a houseplant, and examine it with gentle concern. She produced a small medical kit from her jacket and began treating what looked like a damaged limb, with the same focused attention she'd applied to water rights and power distribution problems. The creature was probably going to die anyway. It was just local wildlife, ecologically insignificant. Any rational person would have left it alone and continued their evening walk. She spent 47 minutes, fashioning a makeshift splint and temporary shelter, talking to the creature in the kind of reassuring tones people usually reserved for sentient beings they actually cared about. By the time she'd finished and resumed her walk, Wraith 77's hands were shaking too badly to maintain proper sight alignment. The universe, Wraith 77 had learned during his years of professional killing, had a peculiar sense of time. It would provide perfect assassination opportunities during family reunions, deliver crucial intelligence during bathroom breaks, and ensure that your most important contracts coincided with natural disasters, political upheaval, or in this particular case, the kind of thunderstorm that made the planet's weather modification system sound like it was having an existential crisis. Friday evening brought clouds that looked like they'd been designed by someone with strong opinions about atmospheric drama and a complete disregard for precipitation moderation. The first drops started falling just as his target finished her weekly visit to the refugee children's educational program, where she'd apparently been teaching basic engineering principles through the medium of building blanket forts. This was it. This was finally it.
No witness, no helpful farmers offering technical advice. No injured wildlife requiring impromptu veterinary care. Just one human diplomat walking home through increasingly biblical weather conditions. Completely alone and utterly vulnerable. Wraith 77 positioned himself along her route with the kind of methodical precision that had made his reputation. The storm would mask the sound of his weapon. The rain would wash away forensic evidence. The timing would look like tragic accident. Diplomat struck by lightning during freak storm. Investigations would conclude after perfunctory review. He'd even prepared a backup plan involving structural damage to a nearby communications relay, just in case anyone asked uncomfortable questions about scorch patterns or energy discharge residue. The weather cooperated with almost suspicious enthusiasm. Wind howled through the settlement's carefully planned green spaces. Rain fell in sheets that turned the usually picturesque pathways into temporary rivers. Lightning provided dramatic illumination at precisely choreographed intervals. Perfect conditions for murder. His target appeared right on schedule, hunched against the storm, but moving with the purposeful stride of someone who'd decided that weather was merely another problem to be solved through appropriate clothing and forward momentum. She'd wrapped herself in what appeared to be a combination rain jacket and portable greenhouse, because of course the humans had invented weather gear that doubled as agricultural equipment. Wraith 77 raised his rifle, acquired target lock, and began the final trigger squeeze that would end both his mission and her unprecedented career in weaponized niceness. The shot never came, because at the exact moment when professional obligation should have overridden personal sentiment, his target stopped again. Not for injured wildlife this time, but for a small figure huddled beneath an inadequate shelter beside the path. One of the young Hex refugees from the morning's water rights discussion, caught in the storm without proper protection. Through his scope, Wraith 77 watched her approach the child with the same gentle concern she'd shown the injured creature, the frustrated farmers and every other problem that had crossed her path. The Hex child was shivering, a concerning development for a species that required precise temperature regulation for healthy development. Without hesitation, she stripped off her own rain protection and wrapped it around the small crystalline form. "Hey there, little one," she called over the storm, her voice carrying the kind of warmth that made hypothermia seem like a minor inconvenience. "Let's get you somewhere dry." She lifted the child, who couldn't have weighed more than 30 pounds but represented about 60 pounds of pure crystalline fragility, and began carrying him toward the nearest shelter. This put her directly in Wraith 77's crosshairs, moving slowly and predictably through terrain that offered no cover. It should have been the easiest shot of his career. Instead, he found himself lowering the rifle as something that might have been conscience. Finally overpowered something that had definitely been professional training. You couldn't kill someone who was using herself as a human umbrella for refugee children. It violated some fundamental law of the universe that apparently trumped Galactic Dominion contract. The storm chose that moment to remind everyone that weather systems had their own priorities, delivering a lightning strike that knocked out the local power grid and turned Wraith 77's position into an illuminated beacon for anyone with functional eyesight. His target looked up from securing the Hex child in a temporary shelter, spotted his distinctive silhouette against the dramatic sky, and did something that completely redefined his understanding of appropriate crisis response. She waved, not the startled gesture of someone discovering an armed assassin, not the terrified reaction of someone realizing they'd been stalked for the better part of a week, just a friendly acknowledgement, as if finding heavily armed figures lurking in thunderstorms was a normal part of her evening routine. "Are you okay over there?" she called, raising her voice above the weather. That lightning was pretty close. Wraith 77 stared at her through his scope, rain running down his face, weapon systems powering down from sheer confusion. In 30 years of professional killing, across 43 different worlds and approximately 400 successful eliminations, no one had ever asked if he was okay. "You look like you might be having equipment problems," she continued, apparently unbothered by the fact that she was having a conversation with someone who'd been trying to kill her for the better part of a week. "The storm's playing havoc with electronics. I've got hot coffee and a decent repair kit back at the community center if you need help." This was not how assassinations were supposed to work. There were protocols. Professional standard. Established procedures that did not include beverage offers from targets who seemed genuinely concerned about their would-be killer's welfare. Wraith 77 started, then stopped because he had no idea how to complete that sentence. What was the appropriate response when someone offered to help you repair the equipment you'd been using to murder them? You're probably wondering why I'm not running away screaming, she said, demonstrating the same uncanny ability to read situations that had made her so effective at diplomatic problem-solving. Honestly, I figured if you'd wanted to hurt me you'd have done it by now. You've had plenty of opportunities. She had noticed. Of course she'd noticed. Someone who paid attention to irrigation schedules and dietary restrictions and cultural sensitivities would definitely notice being followed around by a professional killer. Plus, she continued conversationally, you helped that injured creature Tuesday night. I saw you checking on it after I left. Anyone who takes time to make sure a wounded animal stays safe probably isn't planning to cause harm to people. Wraith 77's worldview completed its final catastrophic collapse. She'd seen him checking on the creature. She'd known he was following her, and instead of reporting him to settlement security or fleeing to a safer location, she'd apparently decided he was just another problem that could be solved with sufficient application of patience and possibly hot coffee. I'm supposed to kill you, he said, because sometimes professional honesty was the only response to complete professional failure. I figured, she replied, as if discussing weather patterns or crop rotations. Someone hire you, or is this more of a personal project? The Galactic Dominion, you're apparently bad for business. Ah, she nodded with the kind of understanding usually reserved for minor administrative complications. The peace thing. They're not fans of conflict resolution, are they? Not when it interferes with weapons sales and protection racket. That makes sense. Well, you probably should have killed me by now if that was the plan. But since you didn't, and since it's absolutely pouring, would you like a ride to wherever you're staying? I've got my transport parked at the community center. The storm was getting worse. His equipment was failing. His target was offering him transportation with the same casual friendliness she'd show to any stranded traveler. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice was pointing out that he'd never actually wanted to kill anyone who'd offered him coffee and weather protection. This is highly irregular, he said, which was possibly the understatement of his professional career. Most of the best solutions are, she replied. Come on, let's get out of this rain before we both catch something unpleasant. 20 minutes later, Wraith 77 found himself sitting in the passenger seat of a remarkably comfortable transport vehicle, drinking the best coffee he'd encountered in 3-star systems, while his former target cheerfully discussed the engineering challenges involved in weather modification on frontier worlds. She dropped him off at the spaceport with directions to several decent off-world restaurants and a recommendation for a career counselor, who specialized in professional transitions for people with highly specialized skill sets. If you ever decide you'd rather solve problems than create them, she said, we can always use people with your attention to detail and crisis management experience. 2 hours later, Wraith 77 was aboard a transport ship heading for the Galactic Rim, having sent his resignation to the Void Hunters Guild and his mission failure report to the Galactic Dominion. Both messages were brief, professional, and completely inadequate to explain what had actually happened on Haven's End. The Dominion's response came within hours. Immediate deployment of a full military strike team to eliminate both the original target and their compromised assets. The strike team arrived to find Haven's End's defensive systems had been upgraded with Void Hunter Guild technology, operated by someone with an intimate knowledge of Galactic Dominion tactical procedures, and coordinated by a former assassin, who'd apparently decided that protecting people was more interesting than killing them. The attack failed spectacularly. The strike team was captured, disarmed, and invited to stay for dinner. 3 of them accepted,